Okay, so it is the 100th episode of the Plant Cutting Podcast, and it's a swap cast with Zamboni Funk, and we're going to do the year ahead 2023.
Yay.
So, Zamboni, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here. I've been coming on the show for a little while now, and I'm thrilled to be here each time.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you back. It's always a pleasure.
And so, would you like to tell the listeners about your podcast too, if they don't know about it?
Sure. Yeah. So my podcast is called What is the Time? It is a podcast about personal sovereignty, celestial timing, and living where the getting is good. We get into hard stuff. We talk about fortune telling and divination quite a lot as being astrologers and whatnot, but then, we end up talking about truth in ways that are, sort of uncomfortable, and you have to get into them from ways that are sort of like outside the normal path or whatever. And so it's been a really fun opportunity to sort of just dig in there and talk to people about how to come into a kind of sovereignty even when times are crazy. And so it's been a fun time. And we do a quarterly forecast on there. I do that with Palace Augustine and Cameron Allen, who are my friends and who are brilliant astrologers. And so we do that every quarter, as well as not simply talking about astrology, but other stuff as well, sort of the wider realm of magic and herbalism and health and whatever it takes to be strong and sovereign in this world, in this moment.
Hell yeah.
Love it. Also want to plug your dailies over on the social medias, TikTok and Instagram, and your weekly forecast that pretty much get me through the day to day and the week. It's like the main reason I have to go over to social media is to see what you have to say about the day.
Sure. That's really nice to hear. Thank you for that. Yeah, I've been doing dailies and weeklies for almost 5 years now. And at the spring equinox, it'll be 5 years. So yeah.
Congratulations.
That's incredible.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like a real forecaster at this point,
Yeah.
You're doing it, man.
I'd like to do a little plug too. I just started a show called Ask Isaac on the YouTubes. And if you're not following us on YouTube, it's Plant Cutting on YouTube. And it's Ask Isaac. It's a video advice column using horary techniques. So I ask questions. The first one I did was, one of them was, do aliens live amongst us? I took that as a serious question, so I answered it. And some other fun questions. And then the last one we had how to quit smoking for them.
Mm-hmm.
Will the weather be good in Western Pennsylvania for sweet potatoes? So all sorts of questions. Oh, we also did, will the US collapse imminently? And so I answered that question. So you can check all that out on YouTube under Plant Cutting. It's called Ask Isaac. And
I love that. You've been studying horary for a little while now.
Yeah, I took Chris Warnock's course, and then I did a bunch of free readings. I just posted it on this podcast and on Facebook and wherever, and said I was doing free readings. So I got a lot of good practice. And the thing with horary is that you got to just keep practicing. And so I feel like this show is a great way to do that, to be able to practice. But the other thing with horary is that not a lot of people understand what it actually is, or the right kinds of questions to ask for it, or also how good it can be and how precise it can be at answering questions. So it's also a way to demonstrate and teach the technique of horary. So I'm only done the second show so far of it, but it's a lot of fun. I'm really excited about it.
And submit your yes or no questions to plantcutting@gmail.com if you want to ask him a question that might be featured.
Yeah. So, but
that's cool. We won on the second guest that I had on my show was Gordon White, and we spent probably an hour talking about the metaphysics of the question and how important it is to ask a good question when performing fortune telling, and then sort of widening that out into living in a sovereign way in general, which is sort of what fortune telling is good for, right? It gives you information about the world that you're living in, and then with that information you are better prepared to sort of live your life in a strong and sovereign way. And so we talked a long time about how to ask a good question and what a good question and that sort of thing. And so yeah, I'm totally in deep as far as trying to ask good questions and this kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing too about it, is when people ask you a question, getting into the actual
Mhm.
question, what they're actually saying, what the presuppositions behind the question are. Because so one of the questions I got too was, will AI destroy the arts and humanities? Right? Because that's a serious question for a lot of people right now who are artists or writers or work in academia. But looking at it from that perspective, they're not looking at like a 10th house career question. They're not looking at a 5th house my art question. Even 9th house is like not institutions, university, higher education, spirituality, and so on. But what they're actually asking was a death question. It's an 8th house question. So it was interesting to me to like, you got to like parse out the question and see what they're actually asking.
The way that the question is asked will always color the response in all form, and that's true in an interview, like a podcast interview format as well, like any of that sort of stuff. You're always going to get the question that you ask will always color the way that the response comes. And so if you want to get better information, then ask a better question.
Yeah, for sure.
It's very important.
Yeah, I've definitely found that with just my own like tarot practice of pulling cards. And you know, if I ask a dumb question, the deck will tell me.
For sure.
Like,
For sure.
Don't ask that.
The problem that I run into a lot is, as an astrologer, people will ask me dumb questions, and then I'll have to be like, we have to like spend half the reading being like, okay, well, here's why this question sucks. You know?
We'll have to look at that Gordon White episode that you had on to really dive into that more. Huh?
Yeah, he really cares a lot about the metaphysics of the question, so he was really good to talk to about that.
Yeah.
And questions are also a good place to keep asking questions. A good platform for inquiry. Inquiry is a big part of my spiritual practice, and it's like you look at the question you ask, and then you can deconstruct it. Look, well, why did I ask this? What did this mean? And you trail it back, breadcrumbs.
For sure. Yeah. And finding good ways to ask questions on the regular is a really good way to step into your own power. That's a large part of why I moved into the forecasting space in general, not just because I wanted to get charts out of the way, which I totally did. You know what I mean? I just needed to read 1,000 charts, or 10,000 specifically. I wanted to read 10,000 charts. If you're wondering, I think I'm probably around 6.5 right now. So like still not close to mastery, like long way out from that. But I'm just trying to get through them, just keep swinging that bat, right? But as we do that, then more and more I'm like, okay, so what would be useful about forecasting? Why is this a necessary practice at all? And sort of leaning into that has been strongly informative to my practice. And so I'm glad that we still have the space and the opportunity to do that here. Again, last year we did a 22 year ahead, and now we're going to do this one as well, and I'm glad to be here in this space.
Yeah. Before we dive into the 2023 year ahead, is there anything from last year that surprised you, or that you were like, I was right on about that, or any tidbits that you would like to reflect on before we go forward?
Yeah, in our pre-chat, we didn't talk about this part of it, and so I didn't think to go back and listen to what I had said. And so I've done so many forecasts. I've done, maybe 360 forecasts in between now and then. Every once in a while, I take a day off. I try not to take any, but it'll happen. But I've done a lot of forecasts in between now and then. And, I don't even know what I said. So I can't.
I know. Yeah.
Well, I've got a couple things that stick in my mind just from our last fall forecast. And one was Mars going through Gemini. If you look at it from a medical perspective, that looks like inflammation of the lungs. Also potentially cuts on your hands and so on, cuts on your arms, which I did actually get a lot of over the fall. But the respiratory infections are huge right now. We have got a booming season of cold and flu and other things. So that
RSV has been a big deal, like here I've heard a lot about children coming down with things, and then the sort of like, and there's more and more panic around the communicability of disease and bringing children together and this kind of thing. And then like, people have been talking about like children as like tiny vectors of disease for a long time. But
Yeah.
when I was a child, it felt more joking,
Yeah.
and
No,
I
I
feel
know,
like
yeah.
now there's like genuine concern about that. And I think that that's a really good representation of Mars and Mars retrograde in Gemini, this kind of like
Yeah.
review of pestilent winds,
Mhm.
like how do we really feel about this,
Mhm.
and there's a strong potential for fear or discomfort, especially when there's a malefic around, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Another thing that I thought about was that lunar eclipse on election day. And I think I hedged my bets pretty I didn't come right out with anything, but I think we talked about, eclipses make, especially with Uranus there, make unexpected change. And usually in the midterms, there's a opposite wave. So like blue wave if the Reds are in power. And we were expecting, you would expect a red wave, but there was actually not a red wave. So that was kind of the unexpected thing. And I think it had a lot to do with, well, Venus right next to the sun, because of the women's rights votes, which was a really big issue for a lot of people.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's another thing.
Yeah.
Those are kind of the only things I can think about right now. That, yeah. How was Jupiter going through uh, Pisces and Aries for you?
Right. Uh, you know, Jupiter and Aries for me, the way that I described it on my quarterly forecast was like, because it moved forward and then got stopped and then had to move back, and that stop was next to Chiron and stuff. And so the way that I described it was like a ruined orgasm. I
Oh,
was
Uh-huh.
like,
Uh-huh.
you like are if you're doing stuff and it feels like it's about never mind. And so we're gonna go back into Pisces, and we're not gonna do this Aries stuff at all anymore. And so like
ball.
that
Mhm.
yeah, exactly. And that's like, especially for Aries, which like wants to charge forward and like,
Right.
oh, do the thing, right? And so we're
Mhm.
gonna get that now with so Jupiter moved back into Aries 2 days ago or something like this. And so now Jupiter is moving forward super quickly as far as Jupiter is concerned, and is gonna blaze right through Aries. And so I think that now we're gonna see more of that, whatever was set up during that first period there, we're going to see like that really trying to come to fruition, really trying to pop off. I would expect the Capricorn, or not Capricorn, but the cardinal placements in general, Capricorn, Cancer, and Libra, as well as Aries, to sort of like get a boost that maybe didn't all the way come to fruition during that time. So I found Jupiter in Aries to be like kind of a little bit annoying that way. Then we
Yeah.
moved back into Jupiter in Pisces. And so there's this Jupiter Neptune thing going on here. We've seen a wide proliferation of AI art and AI sort of stuff in general. And so we're getting these
That's true.
questions like you were mentioning before, like, is this going to kill art and that kind of thing? Or, there's been a lot of concern about what AI means in the space of art and creativity. And I think that that is like a little more perfect than anyone could have asked for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what even am intelligence,
Yeah.
the borders are not where you thought they were.
Very confusing. Very confusing.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some really good poetry, and we
Mhm.
like to think of poetry as like this, very romantic human thing. But
You saw good
So
AI
one
post?
thing that I
oh
would,
yeah, yeah, good
if I
AI.
might offer a hot take here,
Yeah.
I think it's very fashionable to come out and talk about how soulless machine art is. And so I can remember people talking about like dance music, talking about EDM and or house
Mm.
music and this kind of thing, and talking about how computerized it is and this kind of thing, where while people are going to shows and having these transcendent experiences and like all the things that one expects from music, people are getting that from that music. And so I don't necessarily know that more computers means less soul, because when we think about art, then an important part of what art is an expression right? It's a communication of some sort. But the thing is that communication requires both speaking and listening, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you listen to a piece of music, if you hear music in it, then there's music there, you know? Like if we think about the origins of music, at some point we didn't have instruments as people. We didn't have any, you know, we had voices and whatever. But at some point in the process of human evolution, somebody had to listen, somebody had to hear maybe some drops dripping down onto the ground or the birds singing or something like this, and they heard something special in that. And so then that
Yeah.
sort of inspired them to sing themselves or to hit some stuff and generate rhythms and this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's because they heard it, not because it was inherently musical, right? Because the water
Mhm.
dripping, or I've heard music in like a grandfather clock. Like my brother has a grandfather clock, and it doesn't
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's not super metronomic. It like it's like a little, it's got like a limp to it. And so because it's on that one side, then I heard a song in it. And so
Cool.
that was just because I listened to it, I heard it that way. And so coming back to AI, so if AI is smart enough to make some loops or some kind of musical situation happen, then you know there can still be music in there because it's still landing on ears which are primed to hear music, the same way that eyes are primed to see faces. You look at the front of a car and you see a face in that car or something
Mhm.
like that, right?
Mhm.
Like your head is ready to go there, and that listening imagination is half of what art is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like the interpretation of the art or of the music is really on the receiving end. So it's less,
Mhm.
maybe less important, um, you know,
Yeah.
if it was made by an artificial intelligence or by a human being.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So we should probably get into
2023?
2023
Let's do
soon.
it. Yeah.
Sure.
I would like to say your Capricorn ingress, or the winter or Q1, Q4 um
Uh-huh.
was a great
I
episode, and
recently did a quarterly forecast. You're talking about that, right?
the quarterly
Yes, there it
forecast.
is.
And Cameron made the point that Aries is actually the beginning of the astrological year. So the winter would actually be Q4 rather than Q1. But it does depends on how you slice up, how you start his circle.
Mhm.
Um,
It would be wildly confusing for us to call this one Q4.
yeah,
would
I think
be.
so.
Yes.
um, but you also you said something at the beginning about like why we do the forecasting, and
Mhm.
yeah, do you think you could just briefly talk about that really quickly? Or,
Sure. Yeah. Well, you know, in forecasting, we're sort of like trying to generate a map of what the oncoming time period is going to be like, right? And the map is not the terrain, but a map is super helpful to have if you're navigating terrain, right?
yeah,
It can be, especially if we're looking at astrology, we're going to be looking at timing a lot. And so, you know, so for example, I've been thinking about this Mars retrograde a lot and getting a lot of readings relative to that Mars retrograde. And
mhm,
so Mars is currently still retrograde and will be until January 12th, right? And then from January 12th to March, late March, then Mars is going to be in Gemini moving forward across the same area of Gemini as it was in before, right? And so looking at that time period, I would not, so before January 12th, I would not try to launch an offensive. I would not try to
yeah,
move forward on something because action, the Mars principle of like doing shit is moving backwards right now. That's in a space of review. So this is not the time to try to do that. And if you do try to move forward, you're likely to be frustrated. You're likely to
yeah,
find that shit's not working the way that you would like it to, and whatever. Shit's not going according to plan. So this is a good time to review the plan, and then after January 12th, move forward on whatever it is you're trying to do, right? And so we can get that from doing a forecast. We can
yeah,
get this kind of information about when is the right time to move, what kinds of things are the right time to do at any particular time. You know, like if we want to, what I try to do with my forecasts is, you know, like see where the beat is, or because it's like it's
Yeah.
all rhythmic timing, right? It's rhythm, cycles, and timing, right? And so this is very much about a dance. And so if you want to dance with the cosmos, then you need to know where the beat is going to be. And then when you know where the beat is going to be, then you can put your booty in that spot and
Mhm.
ride the beat.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay.
Awesome.
So let's get into this Capricorn ingress a little bit.
Mhm.
So this is the winter quarter. We've got the sun here just going into Capricorn. And this is set for Washington, D.C., this chart, because that's the capital of the U.S. where both of us live. I know there are people in other parts of the world. And so, yeah, so the ascendant is at 1 Cancer. So the moon is the ruler of this chart, and she's out here in Sagittarius, ruled by Jupiter, in the 6th house, which brings to mind issues with illnesses, diseases, and the workforce. You know, we've been seeing a lot of people getting laid off. We had that period of time where it was there were not enough workers, but now there's a lot of tech workers getting laid off, and there's a lot of pestilent winds around. And if I'm using Placidus here, so technically the sun would be in the 6th house too, but he'd be right on the cusp. Either way. And then we have Jupiter right there, also going right into Aries on the same day. He's at 0 degrees Aries, the same day the sun is at 0 degrees Capricorn. That's really interesting. Oh, and by the way, you know, if you're into ritual stuff, magic with astrology, just because Jupiter has moved out of Pisces doesn't mean that you're out of luck. In Aries, especially the first, I think it's the 6 degrees of Aries, maybe 8. I have to look at that again. But Jupiter is in his terms or bounds, and he's also the nighttime simplicity ruler. So you can still do some pretty nice Jupiter magic in Aries, but you'd probably want to wait until January 12th when we're actually past that, whenever Mars, the ruler of Aries, goes direct. But I did some Jupiter and Aries stuff earlier this spring, and it was pretty potent. So I'm going to go ahead and recommend that if you can find some good dates. So Zamboni, what do you think about this Capricorn ingress and what's going on here?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think is really important to see with this chart here is that everyone is ruled by Saturn.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to a Saturn rulership. So you can be like, nah, the moon is in Sagittarius, that's ruled by Jupiter. Okay, cool. Jupiter's in Aries, ruled by Mars. Mars is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. Mercury is in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. Saturn's in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. And so this comes back to this ultimate Saturn rulership. And so this is the beginning of the wintertime quarter, right? And we're about to have a whole quarter of review, you know? So Mars is still retrograde at this point and opposite the moon as well. The moon's next aspect is an opposition to that Mars in this chart. So that, you know, we are not done with the Mars thing here. We're not done with the review of the plan or whatever it is that Mars is doing. You know, Mars retrograde has been involved in a bunch of frustrating, annoying, upsetting sort of stuff, right? And so we're still looking at that throughout this whole quarter here. But then, so from this point, then Mercury is going to station retrograde pretty soon. I think that station is at 24 degrees. We can see at this chart that Mercury's at 20 degrees. So we're getting close here, right? And so Mercury is going to station retrograde in Capricorn in the same spot where Venus stationed retrograde last year. So we're going to be looking at some review there throughout that whole thing. And Capricorn generally is a sign that is associated with tradition or conservation in the old way and this kind of thing. So we're seeing that sort of stuff want to come up here a lot. And so we're really just, you know, for this whole period here, for the last, 5 or more years, we've had Saturn in Capricorn just like being super Saturn, and then Saturn in Aquarius being super Saturn some more, right? And so this has been a very strong Saturn period, and now to see that everyone in this chart, and will be for the next 3 months or so, is going to be ruled by Saturn. That's going to go on until Mercury moves from Aquarius. Mercury is about to move backwards in Capricorn. We're not close to that point. So it's going to move forward in Aquarius, or forward in Capricorn in a few weeks, then move into Aquarius. And then from there, it's going to move into Pisces. At that point, we start getting some change in the rulership. But until that point, in like 2.5 months, it's going to be all Saturn all the time. And so we're still going to be sort of like firmly nestled in the sort of like order and way of old, the way that it's been for the past few years, which has been wildly transitional, of course, right? We've seen a lot of major changes. We can look back 2018, that's when Saturn was in Capricorn. That's also when Uranus moved into Taurus. And so we've had some major Uranus and Taurus stuff going on. And that has been a major part of this Saturn story. As Saturn moved into Aquarius, and we've had the Saturn Uranus square. There's been a beef between Saturn, the organizing, managing principle, the one who wants to get into authority and the way that systems are managed and this kind of thing, versus in a square aspect to in a conflicting configuration with Uranus and Taurus, who wants to liberate, who wants to give you sudden and unexpected changes in the way that things move, breakups, breakdowns, breakthroughs, seeing that in the Taurus, in the fixed earth sign. So like breaking earthly structures, breaking the things that are sort of like the thingness of things, and sort of like changing our relationship to that, and that being in some way resistant to the management system that is described by Saturn in Aquarius, right? And so that from 2018 has been an important sort of like turning point for us, a kind of a fulcrum, right? And so as we see this quarter here taking place, that it's like still in this Saturn place, and as we move forward, we're going to see the sun is going to move into Aquarius, and we're going to have a full moon in Leo, which is going to be square to that Uranus and Taurus, and so that's going to bring back this whole Saturn Uranus debacle, right? And so as we're throughout this time period, we're very much going to be looking at the review of this situation, and sort of we have big things that are coming up. We are moving into a next period of history, but it's not time for that yet. It is currently time to look back and think about where we've been.
Yeah, and so in that way, it really makes sense to think of this as a Q4, because this is sort of the end of the last year, actually a couple years. And things aren't going to really change in a big way until the end of March, when we have Saturn moving into Pisces. We have Pluto moving into Aquarius for the first time, and we have then the ingress into the solar ingress into Aries.
So with Saturn at the helm of the ship for the next few months, do you have any suggestions for how we can appease him or work with him, and herbs maybe that would be associated with our homie Saturn?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so currently it is deep winter time. It was -5 degrees Fahrenheit overnight last night. So I am not in a mood to do Saturn herbs that are going to make me cold. You know what I mean? So that's one thing that we're going to, like sometimes you want to treat like with like, and sometimes you want to treat like with contrast. I'm in a mood to be warmed in this moment, right? And so that can be something to think about. If there's super strong Saturn stuff, then I have always found it helpful to nourish the heart and the creative spaces, because Saturn is so Saturn will have you skipping lunch because you've got work to do and this kind of thing, right? And so finding ways to sort of like be in that compassionate, nourishing body space, I think is a really good thing to do, as far as like health practices are concerned and this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's good advice.
As we think about Saturn as well, Saturn is really into habits and routines and management of systems and this kind of thing, right? So can you generate some better systems? Can you generate some better infrastructure? We're moving into a time period when we're not going to have this super strong limit setting consequences machine, right? And so as we move into that period, then we're going to have it's going to be less available to just make stuff happen in that way. And so now is a good time to handle that business, like now's a really good time to build your rain barrels so that you've got infrastructure to contain the rains when they want to come, or build your irrigation ditches or whatever it is, right? Whatever kind of infrastructure you can build. And that can be behavioral, that can be, getting your exercise together, or, going to bed on time, like we're looking at wintertime stuff here. So it's dark a lot of the time. So what if you, rather than sitting with bright screens, what if you went to bed when it was dark outside? These kinds of things.
And got that morning sunlight. Yeah, go outside for a morning walk and set that routine for yourself. I'm also thinking Excel spreadsheets. I'm thinking like getting my like finances in order, like a better system for doing your taxes. This is around the time to like really be on it this year,
Yeah, in that chart that you just had up with the Cancer rising, that's got Aquarius in the 8th, and so that Saturn in Aquarius in the 8th is going to be really good for getting your accounting in order, for getting your tax strategies together, this kind of thing.
So that's February or January.
It's
like the whole time.
That Ingress chart, worked for the whole quarter.
Okay.
Yeah. For this whole quarter, for the whole time that Saturn is in Aquarius, for the rest of the time, then that's going to be good time to do your Saturn things. The way that Austin Coppock, one of my most important astrology teachers, the way that he said it at the beginning of Saturn in Capricorn was, like when we think about Saturn, there's a lot of consequences and a lot of sort of like delayed reactions and this kind of thing. And so we think about that as being like crime and punishment a lot, because Saturn is a malefic. And so we can think about the difficulties that come, like if you didn't do your homework, then that's going to come and bite you in the ass, right? And that's a real thing. But also Saturn will deliver rewards for having done your homework, for having been diligent. You know what I mean? It's the ant versus the grasshopper, right? So the ant who is diligent all summer comes away with resources for the whole winter, right? And there's reward in that kind of lifestyle. And so if you can get on the side of credit where credit is due, right? If you can do your homework, if you can keep your nose to the grindstone, handle your business during this time, then when we don't have this strong Saturn, you will be set up. You already have your habits and routines in order. You'll be ready to keep your boundaries, your structures in place as Saturn sort of crumbles in the wider world around us.
Yeah. And so another thing for our practicing or aspiring astro mages and astro herbalists is, speaking in terms of building your rain barrels, when you have the sun in Aries and the sun in Leo, that's when you make your herbal preparations, your spagyrics, your herbal sachets, or your sun talismans, so that at this time in the winter, you have that vitality from the sun. And at the same time, right now, Saturn is at the strongest that he will be for many, many years, many years. If you've been waiting to do a Saturn talisman or some Saturn magic, even just invoking Saturn on his hour and his day, now's the time to do it. Do it before the end of March, before he enters into Pisces. So then that's a way to capture that Saturn energy for when you really need it. So that's just something to think about. Yeah.
One thing I might say in regard to that though is, we are at the end of Saturn in the height of his power, right? And so rushing to get Saturn now is not the way that Saturn operates.
It is anti-Saturn. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, if you were like there are really good Saturn elections coming up right now. Because pretty soon Venus is going to move into Aquarius, and so Saturn is going to have the nighttime benefic just like hanging out. It's like just a perfect Saturn situation. You know what I mean? And you're going to have daytime charts. The sun's still going to be in Capricorn, so like once the sun comes up, then it's a perfect Saturn situation here in a lot of ways. So So definitely there are good Saturn elections, but like I would hesitate to sometimes I would hesitate to make a Saturn talisman in the first place. I've made a
Right.
Saturn
Yeah.
talisman before. It's malefic. It'll want to fuck shit up sometimes. You can get crazy authority figures like angry bosses and stuff like that can show up. They can sometimes Saturn magic will give you joint pain. Sometimes it'll make you grumpy. Sometimes it'll make you smelly, like this kind of stuff, right? Things that Jupiter doesn't do, right? Like if you
Right.
do bad Jupiter magic, then Jupiter's not going to fuck you up. If you do bad Saturn magic, you will hear about it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is like part of the reason why I'm like big on habits, routines. If you want to do Saturn magic during this time and you're fresh, you're not in the habit of doing astro magic and this kind of thing, then I would start with regular Saturn prayers
Right.
more than engraving a stone
Yeah.
and like trying to do this Big Bang style magic. I would like lean into a daily, regular kind of practice, maybe weekly, maybe on Saturdays you show up and give Saturn a little something and feed the crows or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think
good.
that's wise. Yeah, but I also think you should not be rushing Saturn stuff. But if you're ready to do something, now is the time. You're not going to have a chance like this again.
But maybe it's just like honoring Saturn and saying thank you rather
Right.
than making a talisman.
Yeah, like just saying the Orphic hymn to
Mhm.
Saturn in the day and the hour of Saturn, lighting a candle, and asking for esoteric wisdom or discipline, or just communing with him.
Mhm.
Those are good things.
And I like what you said about saying thank you to Saturn. People don't
Yeah.
say thank you to Saturn very much, even though he's the one really growing people up, really giving you the toughness that it takes to live through an apocalypse and like this sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Like it's not easy to get Saturn's lessons, but then once you have them, you're much, much stronger. Saturn makes people very strong. And
Yeah.
so coming at those kind of challenges and obstacles with a heart of thanksgiving is a really good way to get into Saturn.
Yeah.
Austin Coppock said, the least magic thing is the most magic thing. And I think that that's really wise, this sort of like show up every damn day. And in doing that, then you build something that's really worth building, but it doesn't look like it on the day to day.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like that a lot.
Yeah, and working with your habits, that is, I think, definitely inherently magical. I mean, that in a way, I think that's the only, maybe the only form of free will that we have.
You make a good point.
So what's next?
So maybe we should talk about the Mars stationing direct, because that's the next big thing happening in January.
Yeah.
What's your take on that?
So Mars has been retrograde from a long time now. Mars has been in Gemini since like September 2022, and then moving into, and then like made it all the way to the end of Gemini. I think the station was at 28 degrees of Gemini, moved back for a long time, gonna station direct at 8 degrees of Gemini on January 12th. So, we, throughout this time, I've been talking a lot about Mars. That's our action planet, irritation, rage, anger, pushing forward, motivation, this kind of thing. And so Mars retrograde is a review of that, right? So I've been thinking about review of the action plan or something like this, especially with Gemini. That's a Mercury sign. It has a lot to do with intelligence or words or thoughts. And so planning shows up a lot with Gemini and Virgo. And so reviewing the action plan, I think, is a important thing here. And one thing that's really interesting that I've been seeing in charts a lot recently is, so this, whatever Mars in Gemini is angular to, like if you have natal planets in mutable signs and Mars has been just like grinding over this stuff, then this is kind of setting us up for Saturn in Pisces. As Saturn moves into Pisces, then Saturn in Pisces is also going to be angular to your mutable shit, right? And so this Mars in Gemini is like encouraging a review of the action plan or whatever, and then sort of like moving forward from there, then Saturn in Pisces is going to be like, okay, cool. So how did that plan go? Like, is it I love that Terrence McKenna quote, if it's real, it can take the pressure, right? And so Saturn wants to make things real. It puts pressure on stuff. It like adds weight to things. And then that is it shows you if it's real. You know, if it's real, it can take the pressure, and so it'll be able to handle Saturn's burden or Saturn's weight on there. And so this is kind of like opening the Mars retrograde, I think, is like opening the door to the Saturn in Pisces moment.
Yeah. As somebody with a big Sagittarius Gemini axis, yes, my ascendant in Sagittarius, I got a lot of planets in, I've got planets in both. It's been interesting. So I'm excited for that to change. But then, then we've got that Pisces Saturn squaring all that stuff. So, hey, that's the way it goes.
Sure. Yeah, so July 12th or January 12th rather, comes, and then we start moving forward with the Mars thing, and so we're turning back around, we're going forward again. So there's been a review of the action plan. Now it's time to try to put some of that action into place to try to actually do the thing in whatever way you can. It's important to remember throughout this time that the plan rarely survives first contact with the enemy. And so it's as you're doing your, if you're watching this before the end of the year or whatever, then we're going to be in position to be still doing the planning part of it. So make sure and build some contingencies into your plan as well.
Yeah. And so do we have any predictions about this? It's going to station right there, on Antares, another a big red star. I think it's Antares. So that's kind of a little, suspect. But Mars is war. I mean, do we do you have any mundane predictions?
Yeah, well, so if we're gonna look at the wartime stuff, then there's plenty of war to be had in the world right now, right? The sort of the most famous one is the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and we've watched that border move forward and back a couple of times here throughout this process, since the time that since it began, but then since the time that Mars moved into Gemini, we've seen the Russian border move west, and then we've seen that same border pushed back toward the east again. And that push back toward the east coincides perfectly with Mars retrograde, right? And so this is the warrior being pushed back. And so that makes all the sense here. And so, as we see Mars moving forward again, then what are we going to see there? Are we going to see some forward motion? Hard to say exactly. I don't often like to opine on such situations, but we've heard a lot about the increase of the draft and increase of the draft age and this kind of thing in that area of the world and this kind of stuff. We've heard about more and more money being pumped into that area of the world and this kind of thing. We've seen a lot of sort of plans for escalated conflict. They wouldn't be sending all these weapons if they weren't planning to shoot. And so I would think that, some shooting is probably going to take place.
Yeah.
Do you think that warmongers, people in charge, have astrologers?
They should. I would imagine that Russia probably does. Russia has a strong history of incorporating the occult into their imperial practice. And so I would think that they probably do. I don't think the United States does. And I think that's to their detriment.
Yeah. Well, it would make sense just from looking at the looking at it symbolically, that whatever happened over the last few months since Mars went retrograde will be reversed as Mars goes back through that territory.
Reverse, right?
Right. Yeah. So I guess the next thing to do would be to get into this Saturn ingress. Okay, so this So I don't know if people do this like the same way that you do a solar ingress for the capital of the country. I'm just going to go ahead and cast a chart here for the exact moment that Saturn enters Pisces for Washington, D.C. So then in this chart, this is the Saturn ingress into Pisces. We've got 4 degrees of Taurus rising, and the north node is right there, right on top of the ascendant. We've got a lot of stuff in here in the 11th and 12th. Moon down here in Virgo. But
Yeah,
let's
that's a
talk
full
about,
moon in Virgo.
yeah, it is.
Oh,
And it's closely
actually
square to
very
Mars in
close.
Gemini as well.
Yeah.
As well as being opposite to Mercury in Pisces, who rules Virgo and Gemini. So this looks deeply confusing, and it looks tense as well, with a square to Mars. A square to Mars in Mercury signs looks like anxiety, probably. It looks like, that it's been this whole Mars retrograde has also been square to Neptune. And so part of the irritation of the Mars thing has been around confusion, around not having good information, around perhaps knowing that your information sucks, but then not having access to better information, and the frustration that that causes, and this kind of thing. What that's been a thing for me a lot recently in sort of trying to navigate the informational landscape that we're in right now, sort of on the understanding that everyone is lying a little bit, or a lot of it. And so it's sort of trying to parse out where, like trying to like compare all the different stories and get an idea of like what I think might be actually happening. And then sort of like the whole time aware that it's all a dream also. It's been very difficult in that regard, and that has been frustrating to the Mars thing here, right? That continues to be frustrating to the Mars thing in this moment, as well as being frustrating to the moon thing as well, right? So like this moon is an extremely uncomfortable moon. This moon is not having fun. It's in a T square, in a whole sign T square to malefics. We've got an opposition, a whole sign opposition to Saturn in Pisces there, as well as an applying square to Mars. This is hard on the moon thing. It's hard to do the things that the moon likes to do, like taking care of things or nurturing things, and this sort of stuff. I see that like AC is having a whole moment in her body right now, right on time, right? So like the moon has to do with the body and this kind of thing. There's like coughing and all of this stuff happening over there. They had to mute the mic. I don't even know what's happening, but she looks very uncomfortable. This is perfect timing, right? This is what we're looking at, this kind of stuff as we move into this this period of Saturn in Pisces, I feel like.
And so also we've got Neptune, right? Neptune's right there in Pisces. We've got the Sun, we've got Mercury, and we've got Saturn right there, co-present with Neptune, who's the planet of confusion and modern. He rules or co-rules Pisces. So they're all in here in Pisces in this sea of confusion. And so
Deep sea.
And what does this mean for Saturn?
Sure. Well, so the way that I've been thinking about this is that Saturn starts to lose grip a little bit toward the end of Saturn in Aquarius. So during Saturn in Aquarius, we've got all this great Saturn. Venus is there. It's like in this whole sign sextile to Jupiter. It's in a trine to Mars. Like everything is like really working for the Saturn. And then as the sun gets closer and closer, then Saturn goes under the beams of the sun. And as that happens, then Saturn starts to lose some of its power and authority to do its thing. And so to my mind, this is like Saturn starting to lose grip a little bit, right? We can think about Saturn as the iron fist. It's like had a super tight grip on stuff for a long time. There's been widespread imprisonment and whatever throughout the world, right? And so there's been a super tight grip. And then kind of like in this invisible way that you don't necessarily see coming, then like it goes under the beams of the sun and Saturn just sort of starts to lose grip a little bit. And then as Saturn, so here in about, this is about the time that Saturn's going to be sort of emerging from the beams of the sun, and Saturn comes out from under the beams in Pisces. And then, in this space where like now it's co-present with Neptune, now it's not ruling itself, but rather it's ruled by Jupiter, who is then subject to other people's rule or other planets' rule as well, right? See that stuff going on here. It looks to me like, and Saturn's not in dignity for years and years at this point. So there's this sense of like, you know, moving away from the Saturnian authoritative rule and this kind of stuff, you know. But because that happens by way of invisibility, I think it's really interesting that the sun like sort of overtakes it there for a little while, and so we don't necessarily see that Saturn stuff hasn't, you know, like there's the impression that it's still operational for a little bit here, and there's probably going to be kind of a little bit of a realization that's going to have to take place. It's like, oh shit, this is, I thought these systems were working, they are not working.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is really interesting to me, about how, yeah, these systems of control are having their sort of last gasp,
Mm.
with as much power as they have had over the last however many
Mhm,
years.
mhm.
And
But like, you know, so there's still going to be a lot of power in the narrative right now
right.
in
Yeah.
this moment here, right? We can think about all this Pisces stuff as being the dream, and or I think maybe a better way to describe that would be the dreaming, right? Like the way that a narrative takes place, or the way that minds sort of congeal themselves around an idea of what reality is. And you know, we see that Mercury is here in Gemini square to Neptune, going to be like really, like maybe even wanting to weaponize the idea of reality or the dreaming that's taking place here, all that sort of stuff, you know, that's, and in the era of air now, you know, like this moment, this 200-year moment where we've got Jupiter Saturn conjunctions that are going to be taking place in air, and therefore constituting reality on the basis of air politics or air dynamics. And then we're going to be seeing a strong move toward information and mind as the seat of power. And so I think that really is strongly spoken to here, although, you know, it looks a little more chaotic than, like, there's, I think one of the things that, like, we can look in the United States and see how very coordinated the Republicans are. You know what I mean? They have a single narrative that they do that thing, and like for the most part they don't deviate from that, right? And so that makes them a cohesive block, which makes them very powerful politically. And I feel like in this moment we sort of start to see the disillusion of that block, you know. And there start to be, it's a little bit like dandelions coming up in the, or weeds coming up in between the concrete blocks, you know.
Mhm.
And just kind of like, you can't really stop it, and it's kind of slow and tectonic in the way that it shifts, you know. Like how did the slab of concrete come to have a break down the middle of it? You know what I mean? It was because the earth shifted underneath it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So for me, looking at this pileup in Pisces, I guess it's a very they're all very evenly spaced.
Yeah.
What I'm seeing is, okay, so say 10 years ago, you know, for instance, somebody like me in alternative circles, going to Occupy Wall Street or something like that, it was very obvious that, you know, the government was lying, pharmaceutical companies are lying, the media is lying, right? Over the last 4 years or so, since Saturn has been in his signs, that has shifted quite a bit for a lot of people who consider themselves alternative or rebellious or something like that. It's kind of been interesting. But what I'm seeing with this Saturn coming into Pisces is yeah, the dissolution, dissolution of this power, and of belief in this power and in these control mechanisms. But at the same time, the sort of being lost in this sea of confusion, where there are a lot of different narratives, and a lot of them are just as insane as, well, even more insane than like the official narrative. And that's a very difficult spot to be in, because people are going to be like, well, I don't trust the government anymore, okay, so I'm going to trust Alex Jones or something like that, which is just, you know, trading something that's not very good for something that's even worse. uh, anyway, that's what I see happening right here, and this may be a direct consequence of, for instance, what's happening with Mars in Gemini.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the information is definitely whack. And you know, we in this chart we can see that this Mars in Gemini is ruled by Mercury and Pisces, right? Mercury in Pisces is great for song and for melody and for you know, poetry and creative expression and this kind of thing. It's not good for prosaic, clear understanding. You wouldn't want to use Mercury in Pisces to do your taxes, for example. And so the way that you might want to use Mercury in Aquarius to do your taxes, right? And so, and Mercury in Aquarius will be really good for doing your taxes this year. But as we, yeah, to see this here, it's just more and more confusing. And then, you know, and Mars is direct at this point. So it's like, okay, so your information sucks, but you still got to do shit. So what are you going to do?
Right. And who are you going to believe? What are you going to believe?
Mm-hmm.
When there are so many competing narratives that are, and many of them are just equally insane.
It's part of the reason. Well, this is part of the reason why I center personal sovereignty in my show, because there are so many competing narratives, and there's so many people who want your mind and your attention and this kind of thing. George Clinton said, "Mind your wants," because somebody wants your mind. And
Oh,
so
that's such a
if
good
you
line there.
yeah. And so if you can sort of like get clear in yourself, if you can have integrity in your own sense of self and your own sense of character and your values and have a wholeness in that, then you can let that be your North Star and let that guide you as you navigate the hellscape that this describes here.
Yeah, and one phrase that is very important in one of my spiritual traditions is that one of the goals is to become your own authority. You know, you've got to become your own authority, and that's a very difficult process because there are all these unconscious drives and voices that you haven't necessarily even looked at or questioned. But one thing that I would also like to note before we leave this chart is that in this chart of Saturn moving into Pisces, we have the North Node and Uranus right here on the ascendant in the first house. And to me, that shows, you know, rebellion, unrest, and that's going to be a big component of Saturn moving through Pisces is of people also challenging that authority that they have seen through, kind of. You know, they've seen the Wizard of Oz, and he's just a little old man.
Yeah, I would think here also it's important, I think, to remember that Saturn and Uranus have been inimical for a number of years now, with Saturn and Aquarius square to Uranus and Taurus. But now with Saturn in Pisces, we've got a sextile. And so these things are complementary to each other. The water feeds the earth, right? And so they're now gonna work together in some kind of way. So if I were a Saturn type, if I were like in a position of management or authority, and I were seeing this kind of thing, then I would be encouraged to like never let a crisis go to waste. You know what I mean?
Not like they ever do go to waste anyway.
Well, sure. Yeah, but if I were like in a position to try to control or to try to you know, corral or, you know, administer the energies that are around here, then, you know, this is sort of like if you can't beat them, join them a little bit. Like if you're Saturn and you're fighting against that Uranus and you're fighting against the social unrest or the rebellion or whatever it is, and you find that you're losing grip and you're not able to do that as effectively as you maybe wanted to be, then how can you work together with that? You know, and so we might, you know, this is there's good energy here for like informants and this kind of thing as well, you know, seeding false narratives into the revolution and this kind of thing.
Yeah. And this is something you see a lot. If you can't beat them, co-opt them.
Mhm.
Yeah. Big time, big time.
Okay. So I guess we should then go into ingress here.
Sure.
So this is happening just a little bit later, March 20th, and we've got the sun going into Aries, and there's a lot of stuff going on here in it's almost a new moon. So we've got Pisces, we got Aries, we got Taurus, everything's kind of up here. Got the ascendant in Virgo, and the ruler of the ascendant is Mercury right here, closely conjunct the sun, so he's combust, and he's in Aries, which is pretty fiery. So yeah, what do you have to say about this chart?
Sure. So it doesn't look like the information has improved. Mercury is under the beams of the sun, is closely combust. Mercury is burnt to a crisp here. You know, it feels like speakers that have blown out because they're blaring so loudly and this kind of thing, you know, or I've heard about people like they'll develop hearing loss at the exact frequency that their spouse's voice is at, because they just like can't hear that bullshit anymore. So that's the sort of thing, that's the kind of vibe that I get here with this Mercury, who's ruling the ascendant, who's also ruling this Mars, who is in the midheaven sign. And you know, so like this is you know, the information did not improve for sure. You know, we are looking at the Aries ingress, which we think about as being springtime and as being like the beginning of things. But it's also worth noting that this is a balsamic moon here. So this is the dark moon. This is the end phase of the moon. And so, you know, like we still have Mars in Gemini here. The Mars is like almost at the degree of the end of its shadow here. And so if we're looking at this particular moment as coloring the quarter that's ahead, then we're still in a little bit of a review space. We're still don't quite know what's going on. We still are looking into the old stuff here. You know, we do have the, you know, new things taking place here. We've got Saturn in Pisces, and Pluto is about 4 days from Aquarius at this point. And so there's stuff going on here for sure. We can also see in this moment that Venus is at 4 degrees of Taurus, which is on that north node, which is where the ascendant was in the last chart that we saw. So and that was the Saturn ingress. So, you know, so there's some stuff going on here for sure, but I you know, I don't feel like we're firmly into newness or a next way of thinking about things yet. You know, one thing that I also noticed with this chart is that everything's in the West. And so, you know, it doesn't feel like possibility when there's stuff in the West. It usually feels like things are sort of like set in their course. Things are already, you know, like when it's a new day, when the sun has just come up, then there's like all this possibility, and it's like, okay, I haven't fucked this one up yet, right? Whereas in the West, it's like, you know, like this one's kind of on the books already, you know?
Done with that. Yeah, totally.
That's a good way of looking at things.
So in general, when you see a lot of planets all in one little section, does that indicate confusion? Because there's a lot of competing energies happening? Or is it more specifically this chart?
Yeah, that's going to be more this chart. You know, I don't know. Let's think about that for a second. The last time I can think about like a major pileup was in 2020, and it was it was like 9 planets in Capricorn or some shit like that. And so was that time confusing?
Yeah.
Sorta. Was it not confusing? A lot of people will be like, yo, I saw this shit coming the whole time. Like, you know, is that revisionist history? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know?
Interesting.
Yeah. I'll think about that. That's a good question.
Okay.
Let's talk Pluto.
Okay,
What's
let's talk.
happening with Pluto?
Let's talk. What's happening? Yeah, we got Pluto here. So now everything is in the east. This is just a few days
Oh yeah.
later.
Sure.
And Pluto is entering
Aquarius.
10th house. Yeah.
Pluto into Aquarius for sure. Yeah. What do you think about Pluto and Aquarius? I know you've been thinking about it.
Okay, so I read recently, and we actually talked with John Michael Greer about this on the show. He put a book out called The Twilight of Pluto, and in it he argues that Pluto was a planet while it was a planet, but now it's not a planet, and its influence is waning.
Oh.
And so it's the planet of, the underworld, of intense division, of intensity, but also of overhype. So, for instance, nuclear power is a Plutonian thing, and that has been very overhyped. A lot of other stuff in that time period. So, what I see Pluto as still a power, but a power that is waning. And if we look at Aquarius, we see Aquarius as, and I'm still influenced by like the Uranus association with Aquarius, where Aquarius is technology in a certain way, and it's also the airwaves. So I associate the internet with Aquarius, because it's the fixed air. That's kind of, to me, looks just like the internet. And I'm seeing Pluto going into Aquarius as the beginning of the end of the internet. And I know a lot of people will be like, "What? Hot take there." So, but also coming from the way I see things, I see the industrial civilization as collapsing slowly, just like the Roman civilization collapsed, because we are dependent on cheap fossil fuels, and as those run out, things will change. Things will definitely change. We won't have the energy that we've been used to, because stuff like nuclear power is overhyped. Stuff like solar panels are overhyped. It takes actually a tremendous amount of carbon to make solar panels. And they don't produce as much energy as it would require for us to survive in the way that we have been in industrial civilization. So we also underestimate how much energy the internet takes to run. And not just energy in terms of the server farms, but also the equipment and the infrastructure. And so what I'm seeing in this is, just like with any phenomenon, there is with every cycle of growth, we have with a plant, we have the growth of the vegetable growth of a perennial, and then it buds, and then it flowers, then it goes to seed. And that flowering going to seed, we can see that also with astrology in the 17th century in England, right? At the same time that the elite classes were distancing themselves from astrology, people like William Lilly and Nicholas Culpeper were translating all of these Latin texts into the vernacular English and making it available to the common people of England. And that made astrology popular, but unpopular among the elite classes. But that also allowed astrology to survive through the Endarkenment, the Enlightenment, where all of that stuff was very looked down upon. But it did survive. I mean, that's why we're still using tropical Western astrology right now. One of the reasons. So what I see, Pluto, and Pluto is going to enter Aquarius and then leave, and then enter and leave, and so on. But it's going to take a very long time to fully go through Aquarius. It's going to be many years. And my prediction is, by the end of Pluto in Aquarius, which will be a long time to actually prove this, we're going to see an internet that's vastly different. Pluto's going to go through, divide everything, and Yeah.
We'll go back, like we'll do mesh networks or something like that, where it's
Well-
like regional, like node to node. Everybody on their rooftop has a node, and we can connect the whole town that way, and then spread it out that way.
Perhaps, or perhaps the government controls it all.
Yeah, maybe it's
whatever is left, who knows? But I also see a flowering right now too, because there's never been more internet than right now. You know, with like the TikToks and the working from home and the YouTubes and everything, and also the free esoteric texts on archive.com. You know, like you've never been able to get your hands on more esoteric wisdom than right now, ever. So I see it's both a blossoming and a seeding and a dying. So that's my hot take, which I know many will not like, but also I will say that this take is influenced by John Michael Greer and his take on things. So that's where I am. That I'm going to put myself out there and make a prediction. And we'll see in 17 years what's happening. So anyway, so what's your take on it?
Well, let's see here. I don't think there's any arguing that the internet is going to be wildly different in 17 years than it is now. You know, I think everyone would agree with that. If we just look at the trend of the internet, if we look at 17 years ago, like shit was wildly different, and we can see that it's on an exponential curve, right? So things are very likely to change in a very big way as far as that's concerned. I think one of the things that is really important about the Pluto ingress into Aquarius is that it is 0 degrees of Aquarius has been such a touchstone point. In 2020, we had a Mars-Saturn conjunction there in Aquarius. That was a pretty big deal. Mars-Saturn was like sort of the story of COVID and that whole like narrative that took place in 2020 that was sort of described by Mars Saturn conjunctions and hard aspects, and that was opened by Mars Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius. Then later that year in late 2020 we had a Jupiter Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius, and that was sort of the turnover point from the 200-year period before, which was the era of Earth, and moving into the 200-year period that we are moving into, or that we are firmly into at this point, the era of air. And that was at 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so I feel like that is a pretty, we just earlier this year we had Mercury Cazimi that was right at that point as well. And then we have, so to see Pluto moving into that space, you know, and not only moving into that space, but like there's going to be a station there, and we're going to get Pluto across this point a few times throughout this Pluto ingress into Aquarius. Pluto is going to be moving back and forth between Aquarius and Capricorn for 2.5 years or something like this. And so just really hanging out on that spot and really looking deeply into that, you know, doing the underworld thing, doing the Pluto thing, you know, Pluto, I don't think there's any denying that Pluto is important to this moment in history. If we think about underworld dynamics, if we think about the corruption of systems, the corruption of bodies, of, you know, things that have been important for a long time, we're absolutely seeing Pluto things coming into the fray here, and that being historically significant. And so we're definitely going to be seeing that sort of stuff taking place throughout Pluto and Aquarius. I'm not sure that, or throughout this moment, you know, I'm not sure that I am really ready to make strong claims about what Pluto and Aquarius is going to be. But in the context of this year, then we're going to see Pluto for a few months, not very long, right? Just for a couple of months, but hanging out on that 0 degrees of Aquarius. And so I wonder if some deathly dynamics might have to take place, you know, thinking back to the idea that you know, like the beginning of the year could be in the winter time, could be in the sort of like dead or dark time of the year, right? Like sort of coming into a new phase or a new era, but that being largely described by degeneration and decomposition and this kind of thing. And then, like, you know, in order for new things to thrive, then first we have to sort of take what already exists and break that down and corrupt that and destroy that and digest that. And I think that that's one of the things that I continue to come back to, at least for this quarter, but like throughout, I think the whole year here, is like there's such a strong energy of review. The review of Pluto and Capricorn, the review of Capricorn dynamics, and the era of Saturn that we're coming out of, and like all of this kind of stuff. I think that there's something strongly digestive that needs to take place as far as that is concerned. And I think that Pluto and Aquarius is likely to speak to that in some of those important touchstone historical ways.
Yeah.
As you were speaking, I was definitely getting the digestion vibe there at the end. And I was thinking, that this whole quarter, it seems like it is sort of like a rest and digest, and like the review keeps coming up, and it's still sort of more of the same cycle before we really see a shift. And so I'm thinking digestive herbs, things that are good for the liver and for the gallbladder, and releasing bile, like dandelion root and yellow dock root and things like that. And maybe
elimination,
the elimination, and then like the warming, maybe a little bit of ginger, to keep things moving too. And stimulated.
Yeah, because we are also in this moment of deep confusion, and misunderstanding is like such an important piece of this moment that we're in. And so, finding ways to sort of clarify and move that sort of stuff, because if we think about sort of like getting stuck in the mud or something like that, there's like strong stagnation energy there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that is likely to feel like what's going on here, because it's like, we're in this year ahead forecast right now, and we're, like there's so much stuff that we're trying to move into, but we can't quite do that yet. We still, for months and months, we still have to go back and look at this old bullshit again. And so there's something here that is that I feel like resonates with stagnation. And so finding ways to move that is probably going to be a good thing to do on a both individual as well as a community kind of tip.
Yeah, because if you're confused and you're, feeling that sort of stagnation, that stuckness, then you do have to like take the time and space to digest and to, really be your own authority and to find your own answers like from within, which means like quieting and looking within, so I'm thinking that this is a time that's going to be good for just like turning off all of the chatter and looking within.
Yeah, and also the subtractive path. If we're confused and there's a lot of different voices going on and a lot of uncertainty, in the same way that we can use eliminative herbs to move stuff along, we can also take that maxim of walking away or stepping away, moving away from untruth as a way to clear the mind, clear and see our own voice. Instead of looking for the one true voice, we can eliminate the untrue voices.
I love that.
Cool. So should we go to the eclipse?
Yeah, let's keep it pushing.
So here, this is the Aries eclipse, and
our first one in this series.
So this is really important because it's the first in the series of Aries and Libra. But we also have the sun right here on 55 degrees. So he's right on the
very end of Aries.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how how almost exactly he is on the cusp between Aries and Taurus. And this is where the eclipse is happening. And so for the chart for the Washington D.C., we have Sagittarius rising, and the ruler of Sagittarius is Jupiter here down in Aries also. So he's conjunct the sun. So what do you have to say about this eclipse and this eclipse cycle?
Yeah, so we're seeing an important shift here. For the past year and something, we've been doing Scorpio and Taurus eclipses. So the North Node in Taurus and the South Node in Scorpio. So typically when we see an eclipse series, then we see things that tend to want to push toward the North Node in whatever direction. And it's important to remember that it's not like a smooth progression toward the North Node. There's typically a seesaw kind of situation that wants to take place here. There'll be an eclipse on the one side, on the North Node side, and then a next eclipse on the South Node side, and then maybe another one. And then 6 months will take place, and then we'll get that same sort of vibe again, right? So things will globally push toward the North Node and away from the South Node, but there's a kind of like herky-jerky back and forth kind of vibe, right? And so that has been taking place for the last year and something, where we're moving toward the North Node in Taurus. So the North Node in Taurus has been present with Uranus. And so it's been sort of like doing more of the Uranus and Taurus liberation, leaning into the thingness of things, like what really matters in terms of bodies. And there's a physical component to that. And we've been talking about social unrest and like the ability to feed one's family and this kind of thing, right? This sort of stuff has been going on for a long time, as well as South Node in Scorpio. That South Node in Scorpio is so purgative, right? Scorpio is strongly associated with digestive stuff. You get butt stuff with Scorpio all the time. That can be sexy, that can be bathroomy, and all the things in between. And there's a surprising amount of overlap in what that is, right?
Yeah.
And sort of like getting into the like honest and true nature of that, I think is but then like so like looking at that's been kind of the dynamic that we've been working with for a while here, right? And we're not quite done with that. We can see that the North and the South Node are still in Scorpio and Taurus in this moment, and so we're in 2 weeks we're going to have a next full moon lunar eclipse in Scorpio after this new moon solar eclipse in Aries that we're currently looking at, right?
Okay.
So we're not done yet. So with that in mind, there's some crossfade here, right? We're going to get both of these songs playing at the same time. Maybe they're going to like clash a little bit, and that's just part of the vibe here. But so this is our first eclipse in Aries. We're going to get a new moon solar eclipse in Aries on the North Node. So North Node wants to increase whatever it does. We can also see that Jupiter is here that wants to increase, expand, say yes, confirm whatever is going on here, right? So we're going to see more of the Aries thing wanting to take place here. Now we can think about Aries things as being, so Mars is important and involved here. It's worth noting that Mars at this point is in Cancer. And so Mars in Cancer, this is our most uncomfortable Mars. This is where Mars least likes to be. And so we're seeing kind of an inability to do Mars things, or to do Mars things kind of coherently. A lot of times with Mars in Cancer, it's like, fine, I'll do it if I feel like it. With the moon being associated with physical or emotional needs and this kind of thing, if your needs are not getting met, then fuck your ideas, right? Like I'm not doing that shit because I don't even like it. I'm not even in a good mood. If mama ain't happy, ain't no one happy, right? Yes. That's kind of what the vibes we get with Mars in Cancer, and that's ruling this eclipse, right? Eclipses are sort of uncomfortable to begin with, and we do like to see Jupiter nearby and this kind of thing, but like, there's only so much that Jupiter is going to really be able to do here. So we're going to be looking at wanting to Aries things really hard, wanting to go hard with it. We can think about maybe the Emperor card in the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot. We can think about like this kind of like authority figure who wants to build an empire or something like that, wants to go really hard. With the sun, this is the exaltation of the sun as well. Like I feel like Saturn has started to lose grip here, but there's a lot of like headstrong authority that didn't realize that yet.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Uh, Also, when we're talking about the head, Aries is the head of
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
cosmic person. And if we're looking at in terms of medical astrology, we've got a massive amount of energy coming into that lower, like middle of the head between the top of head is 0 degrees Aries. Right here about the jaw, like this area is the end of Aries, and then Taurus begins. So right in there, I mean, that's a massive amount of energy coming in from the North Node, and then also Jupiter is an expander. He is the greater benefic, but in medical astrology, he can also bring in too much energy. So like
Sure.
he can add too much fat to stuff if you've got, because Jupiter rules fat and he also rules increasing. So we have the North Node and we have Jupiter both flanking this eclipse. And to
Mm-hmm.
me that, I don't want to say strokes, but that's a possibility uh as far as
Sure.
mundane medical astrology goes. And I'm, obviously not a doctor, not prescribing anything for anybody, but just like looking at it symbolically, that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so like it would be silly to be like everyone who listens to this podcast is going to have a stroke, right? That doesn't make
Right.
any sense
That's
at all, right? Because
right. Right.
people are
Mhm.
not it depends on your personal body, where you are on your health journey, et cetera, right? But if we think about it on a mundane level, and we're thinking about civilizations, or we're thinking about societies and this kind of thing, then what would it mean for a body of people? What would it mean for a government body to
Mm.
have a stroke? You know what I
Mhm.
mean? To have this sort of like lapse in communicative abilities, a lack in motor function,
Yeah.
a lapse in the ability to move resources from one area to the next,
Mm.
an inability to move a particular part of the body for whatever reason, this kind of
Mm.
thing, right?
Yeah.
So especially if we're thinking about Saturn as being like a efficiency and management from an authoritative or governmental perspective, or this kind of thing, and Saturn has started to lose grip here in Pisces and this kind of thing, then we might see, like a lapse in the ability of governments, which up to this point have been effective, in being effective. They might not be as effective as they had been in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good take on this.
Yeah.
And it also, to me, it's setting stuff up like this Saturn going into Pisces, this eclipse and the set of eclipses. Like we're setting ourselves up for what's happening in 2024 and 2025 and so on.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
and
this is the first one, right? So we're not there yet. We're not in. This is just the first little glimpse of it, and the nodes haven't even shifted over into the signs yet, and this kind of thing, right? So and it's important to remember as well that eclipses take about 18 months to sort of like the arc of the narrative takes that much time, and so this is day one of that
Yeah.
18-month situation.
yeah.
So we just get the very beginning of what we've got here.
And in a way, this is the last Taurus solar eclipse as well as the first Aries solar eclipse,
Sure.
because the North Node still is in Taurus. And
Yeah, and the moon at this point is like, I don't know, less than an hour away from Taurus.
Mhm.
So, I'm definitely on team like cusps aren't real, but then, also neither is time. So,
yeah, well, the way
it
I think about it,
slides.
that's why I like
Yeah.
orbs, right? I mean, like
Sure.
like the area around the sun and the moon right now is going to extend into both signs.
Sure.
Mhm. Yeah, true.
We can have a conjunction that is between signs in Western astrology. I know in other systems of astrology that doesn't happen, but to me it makes sense because we're looking at these planets and we're seeing a radius, an aura around them.
Mm-hmm.
And this sequence, it straddles the signs, because you have the Jupiter is still conjunct the moon and the sun, and the North Node is conjunct both of them too, and it's really straddling. And you've got this Chiron, which I don't really ever talk about, but he's right there on the IC. That's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, it looks uncomfortable.
Yeah. So
nobody in this chart really looks comfortable to my eye.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that solar eclipse, and then there's another lunar eclipse in May. That is back on that. It's at 14 degrees Scorpio and Taurus. So it's another one
which
of those.
Yeah, and that 14 degrees is very close to the 16 degrees that we had. We had a big lunar eclipse at 16 degrees of Taurus, which was closely conjunct Uranus. And then we had in January or February, when we've got the sun in Aquarius, then we've got the full moon in Leo, which is at 16 degrees of Leo, which is going to spark all that stuff. And so then this lunar eclipse in Scorpio at 14 degrees, it's going to hit all that same stuff. It's going to want to do all that stuff again. We're going to feel all those feels, all those vibes, everything about that Uranus in Taurus. That full moon is going to be opposite to that Uranus. We're going to be like, all that stuff is likely to come up here another time. We are not done with that story yet.
Right. So that's important to note. And then I guess let's get into the summer now. So this is the Cancer ingress. This is the summer quarter for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere.
June 21st.
Wednesday, June 21st at 10:58 a.m. for Washington, D.C. And so for this chart, we have 3 degrees of Virgo. So Mercury is ruling this chart, and Mercury is really well dignified. He's here in the 10th house, and he's in Gemini, which he rules.
I feel like you can see that that Mercury if you like get up in the morning.
Yeah. So he's still in a really powerful position. So there's a lot less confusion now, it seems like, as far as information goes.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he's applying to a square to Neptune. So,
yeah,
that's
there's still confusion.
That's ongoing, and under a square from Saturn in Pisces as well, so like, so there's pressure to get to speak authoritatively, whether or not you have good information. There's pressure to sound like you know what you're talking about. This is, this Mercury is right in the area where Mars spent that whole retrograde period. And so, like I don't know that I trust this Mercury in Gemini as much as I would like to. I probably wouldn't use this for talismanic purposes, for example, because it's got that overcoming square from Saturn. And it's just, I've been like thinking with talismanic Mercury stuff, and it's just like rough for a long time. Now we've got every Mercury in Virgo is going to oppose Saturn in Virgo, as well as opposing Neptune, or Saturn in Pisces rather, as well as opposing to Neptune in Pisces. And I've been sort of wary of Mercury in Virgo opposite to Neptune in Pisces for some time now. But then you add Saturn to that, and it's like, this Mercury is like not our best navigator.
Well, for the way I do astrological magic, as taught to me by Chris Warnock, is if the square is separating, then it's like that is moving away from you. So for me, this does not look bad for a Mercury talisman, because he's moving away. They're both moving away from each other. They're mutually separating, because Saturn is retrograde now. So they're both moving away from each other. So in a way, he's moving away from that confusion of Saturn. But Saturn is on the descendant, and that I don't like.
Yeah, right. Well, so yeah, as soon as you make your Mercury angular, then that Saturn's going to be angular as well. And so that's going to be a problem. You're not going to get around that problem if you're doing astro magic. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Live your life, do your own thing, I probably won't do any Mercury talismans. I probably won't do any like stone engravings in this time. I might do some petitions or something like that, but probably less in the way of strong permanent stuff here. But yeah, like moving into Cancer season here and seeing this strong Mercury, it and seeing as well that there's the stuff in Leo is making a lovely sextile to that Mercury, that again, this looks loud, it looks proud, it looks like it wants to say its piece really strongly and powerfully. And so if you have something that you think is like worthwhile to say, if you've got a hot take that is needed or necessary in some way, then this is real good skies for that, for sure. It's like a little bit like, don't let a crisis go to waste. Like if weird internet information is where we live, then it doesn't mean you can't participate in that. You know what I mean? Spin your narrative, do your thing. There's great magic to be had in that space.
Sweet.
That's good advice. Yeah. And so just to look at the sky right now, so we have Jupiter here has moved into Taurus at this point, and that's kind of a big thing.
Yeah, sure. Jupiter into Taurus is a big deal this year.
Yeah.
It's one of our bigger deals.
What's the deal?
Sure. Yeah, well, so as we see Jupiter moving into Taurus, then couple of things are going to take place here. First is we're going to see Jupiter with the North Node. So Jupiter with the North Node is going to want to confirm the things that the North Node has been doing. So we've been seeing North Node in Taurus. We've been seeing things moving toward the Taurus direction. Jupiter is going to want to say yes to that. Jupiter is going to want to confirm those things, make them bigger, stronger, more resilient, and this kind of thing. I like this Jupiter in Taurus. I think that it's going to be a pretty, it's nice to see Jupiter in a benefic sign, and Jupiter in Taurus here is ruled by Venus, and Venus is in Leo at this point. And Venus is going to spend a long time in Leo because we've got a Venus retrograde here in Leo as well this year. And so that is going to be a pretty big, and it's lovely to see Jupiter in an overcoming square to anyone, really. Like that really wants to sort of improve that dynamic. And so to see that going on there, I like to see that Jupiter in that space. I feel like that wants to be creative. And I've been talking about Saturn in Aquarius square to Uranus in Taurus. I've been describing that a lot as necessity as is the mother of invention, right? And so if we think about Uranus in Taurus as being sort of mad scientisty and sort of like wanting to, like being sort of committed to a vision but not sure how it's going to take place, and so we're going to try all the stuff, I'm thinking outside the box and I know that it's true and I know that it's going to work, but maybe, and like sometimes you like blow up a test tube or something like this, and that's part of the process, that's part of how you get to the place. And so to see this Jupiter here makes me feel like there's a little bit of wind in those sails. It's like you might get a little bit of success. You might get a little taste of something that might be like, oh, this is what I've been trying for this whole time.
Sweet.
Yeah. But so also looking at how Jupiter is affirming and enhancing the activities of Uranus and the North Node. Some of those activities have been inflation, for instance,
Sure.
and the price of meat. So would you this suggest to you an increase in inflation and the price of food, or was it more of a moderating beneficial influence?
That's a good question. To think with that, I might start from a place of like, okay, so what am inflation, right? And so there's something here about the value of goods versus the value of currency, right? And so currency is by its nature symbolic. It's a stand-in. It doesn't have value in itself, but it allows us to sort of exchange value in a standard issue kind of way, right? It's a way for us to come together in our metric of measuring value. So I think one of the important things about Uranus and Taurus has been the thingness of things. I've said that a few times in this show, and it's like, coming into a relationship with the value of the actual thing. Is it, which thing is worth more? Is it $40 or a blanket? Like which of those things is actually worth more? And that's going to depend. It's going to depend on, how many blankets you have, for example, and this kind of thing, right? And so if we're thinking about the price of meat or something like this, like if it's something that you have to have, like you can't eat coins, right?
Mhm.
And so as such, the coins are declining in value while the meat is increasing in value, right? And so that's like what inflation is broadly, right? And so to see Jupiter moving into this area, and then not for nothing, Venus is moving into a retrograde during this time as well, right? And Venus being associated with value and pleasure and this kind of thing, and also square to that Uranus and Taurus. And so there's a reevaluation that wants to take place here. There's a revisitation of how we understand concepts like worth. And I continuously encourage people to, one of the things that Uranus and Taurus is really good at is coming closer to genuine authenticity. Generally, Uranus will try to break you out of systems that are that are sort of like holding you back from your genuine, authentic truth. It'll try to liberate you toward that kind of thing. And so, coming into an understanding of what your genuine and authentic sense of value is and worth and this kind of thing, like how do we actually measure value and worth in the world, and what does it mean to be valuable? Like looking at Venus and Leo here, and the sun is going to, like, throughout that Venus retrograde in Leo, the sun is going to be there for a lot of that as well. And so then as we think with that, like how do I generate my own value in this world? What does it mean to, like, a lot of self-help literature is like, I am valuable by virtue of being a person in the world, or by virtue of being me. And then to me, this looks like it wants to deeply interrogate that and be like, okay, so if I'm valuable just by being me, how does that work? What does that mean? Are all people valuable this way? And if so, what does that mean? How does this work together? All of this together, and personally, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure how that works here. And I think that this will be a really good time to lean into those questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
So we're seeing the good aspects of inflation in a way.
Sure. Yeah. And so I always caution against good and bad when it comes to astrology. Like, we've got words like benefic and malefic, and those things sort of like want us to think that Jupiter is good and Saturn is bad. And I always come back to, like, there are plenty of times when it was comfortable to sit and chill on the couch, but maybe that it ends up being a bad thing because you didn't do your work. And so it's the grasshopper versus the ant in that regard, and this kind of thing, right? So what is good and what is bad? Is it good? Like, obviously it's good to be able to cheaply acquire food and other resources, right?
Yeah, I was just thinking.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But then in doing that, then like, is that good for the people who manufacture those goods?
Yeah.
You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I just kept thinking about, like, the cost of a chicken. Like, I know chicken farmers, I know meat farmers, and they have to charge $35 for a whole chicken, or $45 for a whole chicken, but you can go get a $9 rotisserie, like, made chicken at
Mhm.
Walmart. And it's impossible for these farmers to imagine how it's possible for the chickens to be so cheap. And so it's like
Mhm.
not, beneficial to the farmer that there's these $9 chicken available on the market, but it is beneficial to people who don't have a ton of money to be able to access food that cheap. But it's like maybe during this time we'll see like some, resolution of like the value of products or of food, or things might
And that
be.
looks, yeah, totally. And that looks to be uncomfortable to the consumer who is used to the $9 chicken.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense.
Also, there's something I wanted to say because it was bugging me about looking at Mercury as a talisman. And I know that this is going backwards here, but what you could do by the time we actually get Mercury conjunct the MC, Saturn would be in the 6th house, and he would not be conjunct the descendant anymore. I think you actually could get a decent election with this, because that Saturn would then be cadent, and we'd have to see about the moon. Like the moon looks like she might be slow in this one, and not very much light. But as far as Mercury technically goes, if you're using like Renaissance rules, you could probably get a decent election. Just like a technical thing. Just I was thinking about that. I wanted to.
Sure. Yeah, follow your heart. There's a lot of different electional rules about stuff, and like which house system are you going to use and all this kind of stuff, like, and I will never tell someone to not do a thing at a certain time, worst case scenario, you do it and shit goes sideways and you're like, and you learn from that, worst case scenario, you get good information and you can contribute that to the wider network of astro mages who are interested in this sort of shit. Like, did it go well for you? One time I did a sun talisman during Mars hour, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to do sun talisman during sun hour, but I had but the sun was like in Aries on the midheaven, and so I was like, okay, well, if it's in Aries with Mars, and or like not with Mars but ruled by Mars and all this, like I think I can make this work. And that talisman worked really well. It worked like I'm really proud of the way that turned out, right? So I broke an electional rule and made a talisman that improved my life. So you can always do that kind of experiment and this kind of thing and just see what happens,
And if you have to destroy a talisman that's not working for you, is that also an option?
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah, just make sure that the image is no longer visible. So you can scratch up the image, you can break the stone or whatever, like do whatever you need to do.
Cool.
You would want to do that if you have like a malevolent talisman, if it's causing you some major problems.
Yeah.
But just as far as like, Picatrix rules, you could definitely do an election with this, because the Saturn would be down there in the 6th house by quadrant houses. But yeah, I think also like whatever system you work with is like what works for you too. You know what I mean? Like if you use whole sign houses, then this wouldn't necessarily be a good election. But if you're using quadrant houses, if that's what you do, then this could be a good election. So I think there is the world, the universe is not as objective as we like to think. So I guess we should keep it moving. Is there anything else you would like to say about Venus in Leo, or any other?
Sure. Yeah, well, Venus is going to be in Leo for a long time. And so Venus in Leo, I think, is going to be, this is another one of our sort of major things that's going to be taking place this year, is looking at this Venus retrograde in Leo for a long period of time. So the last Venus retrograde we had was in Capricorn. And then we had one before that was in Gemini. And both of those were sort of tied into these other retrogrades. Like we had we've got this Mars retrograde in Gemini right now. We've got a Mercury retrograde in Capricorn that's happening here, like at this moment that we're currently in time. And so to see this Venus retrograde in Leo here, definitely like sort of makes me reflect on Venus retrograde things. The Zamboni Funk Enterprise really sort of took off during the Venus retrograde in Gemini in 2020. And so there's something there that was during like strong racialized protests in this area of the world. And so, and Venus retrograde often brings that sort of thing up to the surface. We get sort of women's rights stuff shows up, racial stuff will show up, this kind of thing. And so there's that I think that that's really interesting. But then also thinking with Leo, right? And thinking with the sun is going to be there for a lot of that as well. And, you know, I'm thinking here about the way that power is structured and the way that authority is structured. And so we're moving away from a Saturn moment here, right? We've had Saturn in super Saturn time for a long time now, but then coming into this time, and I think the sun is going to like having this Venus retrograde. I think it's going to be strong for the sun. You know,
Yeah.
looking at that, I wonder about like a kind of fame or figurehead authority that might get really inflated and strong during that time. If you've got strong Leo placements, or if you've got angular Leo stuff or this kind of thing, then I think that that might be a good time to, like, there might be really like strong wind in the sails of that Leo stuff during that time. But I think that it's like there's the potential for it to get out of hand. There's potential for it to be too much.
Yeah. And so this is end of July and through August. We're talking about when the sun is in Leo. And you're talking about some herbs for that, maybe?
So for a lot of sun
Yeah. Well, yeah, so we have on one side we have the potential to harvest this massive amount of solar energy, this vitality that we might need like in the winter or something. But they're also, on the other hand, going to have a very strong, harsh sun. So yeah, what would you suggest for like herbal remedials?
Yeah, I guess if the sun's really hot, then you're going to want to do the cooling herbs and mucilaginous herbs like the marshmallow root and aloe vera, and to avoid the sun at certain times of the day, and to seek shade and cool states, to not overheat, to not be prone to sunburn or to heat stroke or something like this. And then the solar herbs like your St. John's wort, and calendula. What else, Zamboni?
Sure. Well, when I'm thinking about the sun here, one of the most important things about the sun, there are two kind of most important things about the sun. The first is that it's bright, right? The sun is super bright. There's a lot of light here. And so if we're thinking about light, then that is life-giving, right? We can think about the way that light and heat drives all of the life on this planet. We can think about photosynthesis, and it's got to be at the right temperature and whatever, right? So there's a lot of life-giving properties when it comes to the sun, and vitality and this kind of thing. If you like harvest the St. John's wort, then you get like this red stuff all over your hands, and it's like super powerful. You can feel the power in that, right? And St. John's wort will like disrupt your hormonal birth control also, right? And so there's like there's an overpowering kind of quality there that I think is interesting and worth thinking with. The other really important thing about the sun, I think, is its rhythmic capacity. So the sun is strongly, like, it generates the singular, the sort of most important singular unit of time, which is the day, right? We've got daytime, which is signified by the sun coming up. It gets light outside. Then nighttime, it gets dark outside because the sun went down. And then we get another daytime because the sun came back up. That's the like most basic unit of time that anyone without any knowledge of the moon, without any knowledge of hours, or without a clock or any of this sort of stuff, you're gonna notice day and night, right?
Yeah.
And so, and the sun is very constant in its motion. It always comes up in the east and does daytime, and goes down in the west and does nighttime, and it just does that on a super regular cycle. It never moves backward. We never get a sun retrograde. It doesn't really change its speed very much. It's 1 degree a day is like how the sun moves. There's a constancy. There's a very strict rhythm to that. And so coming back to what you were saying before about like avoiding overheat and stuff like that, which is a real issue in deep summertime and this kind of thing. Sunburn can be an issue and this kind of stuff, right? So, you know, leaning into the rhythmic capacity of that, and thinking also with like, you know, there's a lot of talk about like blue light as being an issue for people, and how red light is also important, right? But blue light is also comes from the sun, right? So it's not that blue light is a problem, it's that blue light is supposed to happen in the middle of the day. And then so when blue light is happening at times that are not the middle of the day, then that can disrupt the rhythm. And so if we're really trying to lean into the strong sun medicine, then there's something about leaning into that rhythmic, the diurnal rhythm that I think is really important, like being awake and noticing the sunrise, which is when the red light comes through the sky, and being aware of that. And we can think about like the pharaoh, and the part of the pharaoh's job is to greet the sun every day. And like you, if you want to be in your personal sovereign, then you can be the pharaoh and greet the sun every day. And then as the sun goes down on the other side, then maybe you want to send a salutation at that time as well, right? And there's more red light to be had there, and there's a day that has taken place. And then once it's dark outside, then maybe we need to think about going to bed and this kind of thing, right? And so leaning into that kind of rhythm, I think, is a really good way to sort of optimize the benefit of the sun.
Yeah, and maybe we set up that rhythm, you know, in January, February, March, while we were still on the like Saturn wave.
There you go.
So
There you
we
go.
can
Now you're
like,
thinking.
yeah, so then we can actually like, you know, get all of the benefits from the sun and not the problematic aspects of having a rhythm where you're watching, you know, a blue screen until midnight every day. Yeah, I like that.
And I would think that Venus retrograde will probably want to add some disruption to things, right? Because Venus's job is to harmonize and cooperate, and Venus retrograde will turn Venus significations on its head, right? And so there might be a temptation to over sun at this time.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so do we get to the Libra ingress?
Sure, let's do it.
Time for that. Okay, so this is September 23rd, 2:50 a.m. at Washington, D.C. This is the sun here is going into Libra. We've got Leo rising, so the sun is ruling this chart. We've got Venus right there in Leo, as we were just talking about. She's in the first house. That's nice for the people of the U.S.
I have a quick newbie question. Does Venus do well in Leo in general?
I like Venus in Leo. Venus in Leo is one of people will tell you that they have Venus in Leo.
Oh,
like people who know that they have Venus in Leo, they want to publicize it.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
That's one of the ones that like you hear about Venus in Leo way more than you hear about Venus in Taurus or Venus in Libra or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, which is where Venus rules the signs, right? But like Venus in Leo, people will talk about that one. So it's flashy, it's glamorous, it's fun, it really loves itself. I also really like Venus and Leo along with the sun in Libra. I think that is a really nice combination. That,
mutual reception there.
Yeah, with mutual reception with a sextile, you know what I mean? Like they really cooperate well together. The sun doesn't necessarily like being in Libra. That's the sign of its fall or its detriment or whatever. And or not detriment, but fall. And so it's like, you know, it's not super comfortable there in Libra. We can think about Libra as being the scales and sort of like wanting to ask and see how other people are feeling and this kind of thing. Whereas the sun really does best when it sort of stands in its own power and is like, here's what's up. I'm the leader. We're going to do it. Right. And so the sun in Libra can like sort of like not be as strong with the sun kind of thing. But to see that mutual reception with Venus and Leo and that sextile, it seems really cooperative. It feels really team building.
Yeah, technically Venus is what peregrine in Leo, right? I mean, I'm sure she has some other dignities. I don't know, I forget what like the what the terms are here. And
peregrine just means zero, right? It means not good, not bad.
So
like
it is
not
what you make it, and what
sort
else
of.
is going on in your chart.
Totally.
Okay, thanks.
Uh,
It seems, just looking at this chart, everything's a little bit more spread out than it has been in the past few charts that we've seen. Things are just sort of all across the board here.
yeah, very true. So I guess for this chart, I guess there's not really that much more to say as far as we've got Jupiter in the 10th house going retrograde. Now he's going to go back through Taurus.
Gonna stay in Taurus though, not
Yeah.
gonna move back into Aries, just gonna hang out in Taurus for the rest of his time in Taurus.
But the North Node has moved into Aries at this point.
Right.
So we've got
which is important because that means that we're coming up on we're going to do a full moon in Aries in about a week from this day, and that full moon in Aries is going to be an eclipse. It'll probably be like a week when it won't be able to see it too strongly, but it'll be there.
Weeks. It's like 2 weeks and some change later, October 14th, right here.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So this is the new moon. This is the new moon in Libra.
This is the new moon in Libra. This is the oh yeah, we were talking about the lunar eclipse. So this is the solar eclipse in Libra. So I don't have that other chart of the lunar eclipse, but here's the solar eclipse. In this chart we have Capricorn rising. And I need to turn on. I'm just using the Astro.com right now. I don't have like a excellent program yet. But so I don't have the solar.
I use Astro.com.
Okay, so we don't have the south node. The south node is here, conjunct. It's actually pretty close to this. So it's at 24 degrees about.
Yeah, so we're thick in Libra, like Libra south node stuff is we're doing that story now, right? So whereas before we were like in the middle and like it's going to be cuspy and time isn't real and whatever, but like this one is like, all right, Libra south node, we are doing that story now, right? And so if we're thinking about the south node in Libra, then we're going to be thinking about moving away from purging south node stuff, right? Libra. And so with Libra, we can think about balance. We can think about harmony or cooperation. We can think about our Venus things. It's worth taking a look here, noticing that the ruler of this new moon is Venus in Virgo, right? Venus in Virgo. Whenever I talk about Venus in Virgo, I love to talk about Beyonce, partially just because I love to talk about Beyonce. But she's got this song, Pretty Hurts, that I think really speaks to Venus in Virgo. It goes, pretty hurts, shine your light on whatever's worst. Right, it's a song about like eating disorders in modeling and this kind of thing, right? So like this idea of like looking in the mirror and seeing and being like, anyone would look at Venus and Virgo and see how very well put together she is, how very symmetrical, how much effort has gone into the whole thing. But Venus and Virgo will look in the mirror and be like, oh, there's the flaws and there's the flaws and there's the flaws that other people wouldn't even necessarily notice. Venus and Virgo has that hawk eye, right?
Yeah, and so she's in her fall.
Yes, in Virgo.
Fall in Virgo. Yeah, and that's the flaw. That's the fall is the finding all the flaws and focusing on those flaws.
Yeah, and we can see that this Venus in Virgo is also opposite to Saturn in Pisces, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's going to be like extra Venus in Virgo stuff. That's going to be extra hard on itself and this kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, say again.
Well, also, I mean, so Venus is ruling this. She's not having a great time, but also the sun is not having a great time either. So Libra, he's also in his fall, and he's conjunct the south node. So that is a reduction of the vitality of the sun. The sun's vitality is at an all-time low right now because he's in his fall and he's conjunct the south node, which just like removes all the vitality. So that's kind of a difficult place for the sun and for Venus.
Sure. Yeah.
Not to mention an eclipse. So an eclipse also removes. Seems like totally without vitality here.
Yeah, you might find stuff like the paralysis of analysis and this sort of stuff like a difficulty in moving forward, because that it feels kind of pessimistic. It'll never work. This is I'm not good enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not. I haven't done enough homework first, or whatever. The imposter syndrome, this kind of thing, might show up here and be like I don't really, like
Uh-huh.
that's the kind of feeling here.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of like pushing this narrative forward. So Libra is sort of uncomfortable in this moment, right? And Libra is going to be uncomfortable for about a year, or whatever, throughout this whole eclipse cycle. We can think about how later Venus is going to move into Libra, and we love to see Venus in Libra, right? That's Venus at home, able to do the Venus things
Hmm.
Venusly. And so we might we love to see that. But then Venus with the south node as a point of decrease, as a point that's sort of like, it's like a drain, right? It'll take whatever's going and it'll just kind of like suck it down. And so it's
Yeah.
a little bit like if you they say in Chinese medical circles, they say that you should close the lid to the toilet, because if you don't, then it'll just kind of like all the energy will flow down. And so the south node is a little like that, right? And so that's going to be hard on the Venus stuff, on the Libra stuff, throughout this time period. And this lunation definitely speaks to that.
Yeah, and just as in terms of mundane things, with this chart set to Washington D.C., the sun is going to represent the executive of the country. So this is the president, and whoever the president is at this point, which might be Biden, might not. We'll, we'll see. Whoever it is going to have a pretty terrible time for this fall quarter. Seems to me like no power. Yeah, there's like no power to the sun at all.
Yeah, heads of state are not moving into a time period that looks good for them.
Yeah, and it's in the ninth house, which I get. Well, in terms of Placidus, whole sign, obviously that's 10th house, so that's a little better. But yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that goes down. I wouldn't want to be president, probably ever, but
Right, ever.
probably not
Never.
in this quarter. But we also have like the Mars in Scorpio, so he's got a lot of power here, and he's just entered Scorpio, and he's conjunct the MC.
I
So
do like this Mars in Scorpio,
yeah, that's a really
because it's
powerful.
no longer having to deal with the south node there, and so it doesn't have to deal with that drain.
Hmm.
And I really like Mars in Scorpio, just kind of generally. It's got a lot of vitality, it's got a lot of strength, it's got a lot of ability to persevere and overcome things just by virtue of just continuing, just keep on doing your goddamn thing. We can see that this Mars at 1 degree of Scorpio is making a lovely trine to Saturn in Pisces. And I love to see Mars and Saturn working together. They do really well when they can work together. And
Yeah.
so that'll be something, in water signs here, we might see something about something creative, or something emotive in some kind of way, something here about connection. I think a lot about Saturn as being able to build connection. If we think about like a channel or a tunnel or something like this, you can build some boundaries that then go on to facilitate connection, like the way that a pipe would be. If we're thinking about fixed water, like Mars in Scorpio is going to talk about fixed water, right? And so that I really like this Mars in Scorpio. I think there's a lot of strong potential here, and and importantly, it's not getting messed up by like a square to Saturn, as it has been for a few years and whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So with Venus and the sun not feeling so hot, you would probably focus more on the Mars activities, and the creative side of Mars, the community side of Mars.
getting stuff
Mhm.
done side of Mars.
Yeah. Like, so if you're struggling with executive function in
Yeah.
this moment because the sun isn't in good position, but you've got Mars trying to Saturn, then this might be a little bit like leaning into your regular praxis,
Mm,
and uh on the understanding that you don't, because this is Mercury combust again, right? And
Yeah.
so We still don't know what's going on, still don't know what's true, still don't know what's real. But we do know that the regular routine is real. Every day I do this shit. Every day I get up and do my morning walk, like you were talking about before, or
Yeah.
whatever it is, right? And finding that kind of lived reality, that's a sort of like coming into the thingness of things again, right? Like, where do I actually live at? Like,
Yeah.
stop thinking about so much abstract stuff and like, is the war happening the way that they say that it, you know, like they're reporting this and they're reporting that, and like I'm really confused, and like is despotic leaders, and oh, and this one's the bad guy, no, that one's the bad guy, and like there's so much confusion and like misunderstanding to be had there. But your dog has to go outside. Start there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
this is like the one foot in front of the other, day to day perseverance. Yeah, just getting.
Yeah, somebody in a room that I was in was looking at all this and asked the cards about it, and the cards were like, "You mind your knitting," right?
Okay. All right.
And so do the thing. Like, nothing is going to be more important than getting good at making those socks. Do that.
Love it.
Cool. Yeah, that's some good advice. Now, you know, it goes,
makes total sense. Yeah.
it goes into that, like the serenity prayer again. You know, like what you have control over, focus on that. Okay, so that's the last quarter. Is there anything else that we missed that we want to talk about before we wrap this up?
Yeah, the only other thing that I wanted to make mention of is that in this time period, we're going to start to see Mercury retrogrades in Earth signs.
Yeah.
So that's going to begin like kind of nowish in about a week from where we are and where we actually are in time right now. It's currently December of 2022. In about a week's time, we're going to see Mercury retrograde in Capricorn. And this is a departure from, we've had Mercury retrogrades in air signs for a while now. For about 2 years, we've had that. And that, so when I did my toward a relational metaphysics in the era of air talk, then I talked a lot about Mercury retrogrades in air signs, and that being an opportunity to lean into ways of knowing things in air and organizing information and this sort of stuff. And so as Mercury moves into Earth signs, or Mercury retrogrades move into Earth signs, then this is going to give us some new ways to think epistemologically, right? So this word epistemology means ways of knowing things, ways of generating information and understanding, right? And so we've had, for a long time, we've been thinking with, you know, the industrial scientific model of reality, right? And that has given us a lot of deep and important understandings about the workings of things that has been, you know, it's been really important. We've gotten a lot of information from that. But at some point, then the mother culture took that as the only reality, right?
Right.
And where I think, you know, we're moving into an epistemological shift here. And so we're moving from air to earth signs.
For Mercury. Right.
For Mercury, right, exactly. And so what does it mean to think with epistemology, to think with ways of knowing, to think with ways of generating understanding that then come from earth signs, from an earth dynamic, from something physical? And so I've been thinking a lot about the way that bodies take shape, take form, and finding information in that. You know, I've been thinking about like so if you like are out in the woods and you see an area and there's like a gang of poison ivy everywhere and there's all these thorns and all this sort of stuff, like a bunch of that sort of stuff, then you could go through that area, but it's going to be so hard for you. Like, maybe you don't have to do that, right? Maybe the way that the plants have formed themselves are trying to put up a fence or a keep out sign, right? We don't want to see a bunch of hikers through this area right now. So like stay on the other side there, right? And we can see that from the way that their bodies are shaped,
Mhm.
And so I think that there's something really important here about body language that we're likely to want to
Okay.
lean into. We can think about, I come from a Chinese medical background, so we can look at like tongues and the way that your tongue is shaped and the color of it and this kind of thing. We can think about the way that a person smells and the information that you can get about a person from that, or any of these kinds of things. Like, we're moving into a time of really questioning, right? Because we're looking at Mercury retrograde, so we're looking at review, revisitation, et cetera, the re words again, right?
Yeah.
So we're looking at a re-examination of bodily intelligence in a way that I think is really, really likely to be useful throughout this time. It's a little bit in the way that, we're doing apocalypse stuff, and it happens that in this moment we have more esoteric knowledge available than has ever been available in human history. Like,
Yeah.
there's a little bit like the antidote is in the poison here,
Yeah.
right? If internet is part of the poison, then okay, well, also the internet is giving us access to all this esoteric resource, right? And
Mhm.
so if we're looking at ways of understanding bodies and things of this nature, then I wonder if there might be some information here about bodily intelligence and learning to listen to one's body, and techniques around that might be useful in generating an understanding of what is true and what is really real in a moment that is so deeply confusing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds great. That sounds great to, like, after a period of time where, we have depended on the internet so much, we have had so much influx of like this knowledge of from every direction that's a little volatile, like to I feel like a whole theme of this whole conversation for, this year ahead has been like coming back to your own. And now with this Mercury retrograde, these Mercury retrogrades being in earth signs, like coming back to your own body, and not depending on like outside influence to figure out like where you're at and where you want to be. um that sounds good.
Yeah.
But also thinking with outside influence, but thinking with that in a bodily kind of way. I've been thinking about, like, so I love this word conversation, right? So the
Mhm.
word conversation means dialogue. It means that it's the thing that we're doing here, right? I'm
Mhm.
talking to y'all talking to me, right? And so there's words taking place here. But what if conversation wasn't only words, right?
Right.
We can think
That's not.
about,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We can think about the way that hormones function,
Yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
or the way that mushrooms convey information. They don't use words in the way that we think of words, although we might think of the pheromones and hormones that they produce as being sort of discrete word-like
Yeah.
symbolic gestures or whatever, right? But like, that notwithstanding, that might get weird if we try to like follow that rabbit hole a little bit, but we can be clear that they are conveying information and they're doing it in a bodily kind of way. They're using
Sure,
chemicals,
yeah.
hormones, pheromones in order to do that. We can think about the way that, like, sex, for example, is deeply communicative, right?
Mhm.
There's like bodily fluid stuff that goes
Yeah.
on there, and like the contact with it is
Mhm.
part of the conversation. And there might not be a lot of like wordiness that comes through in that moment, and yet there's a lot of deep communication that takes place here, right?
Yeah.
So we already know that this is a real thing, and so
Mhm.
leaning into that and coming to a better understanding of what bodies are, and thinking of what bodies are from the space of intelligence, of epistemology, of generators of understanding and meaning.
Mm.
The innate wisdom of the body.
Mm.
It
Yes.
also, to me, this, like, looking at the last few years where everything's gone online, so like classes, courses,
Job.
workshops, jobs, conferences,
Mhm.
we've sort of been distanced from the physical
Yeah.
interaction, which we had
Mhm.
taken for granted to a certain
Mhm.
degree.
Yeah.
And so now coming back into the physical interactions with people, we're like realizing in a new way the importance of the pheromones, of the body language, of just being in the presence of the electrical aura charge of the heart electromagnetic frequency, being in each other's presence, how important that is. And looking at Mercury in terms of teaching and in terms of conversation, coming back to that, in-person classes. Like, you can get anything you want on the internet, but how long can you watch a video course, even if you're, like you've turned it to like 1.5 replay speed, before you kind of like go crazy. People are wanting that in-person exchange again. And
I still went crazy a little bit in those 5-hour classes with 7-song and herb school at the end of the day. Just sitting in the classroom. But anyway, it's true. People are definitely craving that connection.
Yeah. And realizing, again, like, it's like you don't know what you've got until it's gone. So is there anything else that we want to address before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think that is a pretty good wrap of what we have been looking at here. I think that, like, if we think about the thing in sum, then like, we're not at bubble popping time yet.
Right.
Right. We're still going to see some inflation of probably like inflation in the economic space, but like inflation of figurehead style authority. When we're looking at that Leo stuff, we're likely to, maybe this is the fall of the West or something like that, but like, it's not likely to look like collapse right now.
Especially, at least in the U.S. Now, like, I've looked at these charts for the U.S. I'm not sure what's going on in Europe, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't see like big bubble popping stuff until end of 2024, 2025. Now, this period of time is more like going over and processing the last few years and moving forward slowly into the bubble popping time.
Yeah, for sure. I think that even if you look at like something like Ukraine or something like this, right? Like, it probably really feels like the sky is falling in Ukraine, and we can be real about that, and we can honor that, right? But at the same time, we can also see how that conflict is a reprise of shit that we've been seeing since 2008, right?
Yeah, and even longer than that.
Right. And longer than that. Totally. Yeah. But so if we're like looking at the like proliferation of NATO in the area and this and whatever, right? Like that whole conflict, this is old news here. And so while it is at a tipping point in that area, we're still looking at large scale review in many ways.
Yeah.
And so, we're going somewhere, but we're going there on a geological time scale. So like, we're, if we think about the Earth as blinking an eye, it's like it's gone halfway down at this point. Blink, you know what I mean? Because it's been a couple of years for us, because we move much quicker than geology or the stars do. But it's quick on a historical scale, but on the day to day, we're still gonna have to we're gonna be here for a little while longer.
So maybe like to sum up with some of the herbs for 2023, just to keep bringing it back to the herbs real quick.
Sure.
Thinking about things that are like digestive and eliminative, but then also restorative. Like, we didn't talk about like reishi or milky oats, where things that are going to be like building new neural connections in our brain, like lion's mane and milky oats, or reishi, which is going to be good for so many of our body systems. But things that just help us with the longevity to help like move through and, keep pushing forward.
Process and eliminate the what the problems from the
Mhm.
last few years, really process those, because I think a lot of people have not processed that
Yeah,
stuff
yeah.
to be ready for the next
And in that
shit.
processing, we didn't really talk about like how it affects our emotional heart, but having the processing herbs, especially in like the Q1 side, and then in the summer, with like the solar side, like also supporting our heart with like our hawthorn and rose and motherwort.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Like Sun and Leo, that's the heart. That's the heart and the heart, and
Mhm.
that's very strong heart. Almost maybe too much heart.
Yeah, so the
Yeah,
tonifying
yeah,
heart herbs.
Yeah, yeah. When thinking with herbs and this kind of thing, like so whenever well there's like holistic health stuff here. And
yeah.
so I definitely, from a behavioral standpoint, I would think about something like earthing, like putting your feet on the earth.
Yeah.
And like I think a sauna is probably a really good idea for a lot of
Mhm.
folks. Sweating, and we talked about elimination before
Yes.
and this kind of thing, and processing. That's a really good way
Mhm.
to engage that.
Mhm.
um, I think also it's probably worth taking note of the plants that are thriving in your area,
Right. Very
and this
important.
comes
Yeah.
into that Mercury retrograde in earth signs thing, and the bodily intelligence and this kind of thing, right? So you put your feet on the earth, and then you sort of like let the earth speak to you. I think one of the things that's really important about Mercury in an earth sign, or at earth or water, the yin signs, then that's going to be Mercury. Like, this gets back to what I was saying before about the artificial intelligence and all this. Like, communication is both speaking and listening. And so with Mercury in the air and fire signs, we get a lot more expressive Mercury stuff. It like wants to say a lot. Whereas in the yin signs, in the earth and the air signs, we get a lot more of this listening kind of quality, this kind of receiving information thing, right? And so if your feet are on the earth and you're paying attention, then which plants are proliferating? Which ones are thriving? Like, I'm thinking about there are these kinds of plants, like my homies the dandelions, that thrive when they are like in a disrupted ecosystem. So when things have been upturned by industrial agriculture or whatever it is, then there are these organisms, such as the deer ticks also, that will come in and they'll thrive in that environment. And so then, with that in mind, those folks have lessons for us. They know how to live in this moment. They know how to do well in this moment. And so like you, for example, in our pre-chat, you were like, yeah, the reishi had a really good year this year, right? And so what does that tell us about this moment in time?
Yeah, for sure. And like you were saying, like the poison ivy, being like, maybe we don't need hikers coming through this. And yeah, paying
Mm-hmm.
attention to all of those signs. It's going to be,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if from an herbalism tip, there's the one style which is like, what kind of herbs do I want to eat or drink in my tea, or whatever, like that, topical applications. But then also, like, how can I be in conversation with plant people in a way that is more beneficial, that is more toward the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible
yeah.
than where we have been.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very, you can't give general herbal advice to people usually, because everyone's got a different situation, and that's why I think it is important, yeah, to get in touch with what is happening to you in your environment at that moment, you know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Zamboni, for all the amazing advice and interpretation of the stars and planets.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad that we
Yeah.
had the opportunity to look through here and take get some ideas about where we're headed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel a lot more clear about the whole thing. So I appreciate that. And if folks want to learn more about you, is zambonifunk.com the best place to go?
ZamboniFunk.com. That's where you can find all the stuff. You can find the music there. I don't know that
Yes, you didn't mention
your
that.
plant cutting people know that I do music seriously. I'm a bass player
Yeah.
and a singer. I've got a song out called Can't Help Myself. I got some merch in that area as well. We got hoodies, we got mugs and whatever. There should be some next music coming out. It's going to be a breathwork exercise that goes with the music. And so I made the music good enough that you could just listen to it as music, but there's also a breathwork component to it. I think that breathwork is a really good way for us to get into a space of groundedness in our bodies and this kind of thing. I think that's going to be a useful tool. So you'll be able to find all that. You'll be able to find the music. You'll be able to find the podcast where we ran through how to do questions with Gordon and all of the rest of that. You'll find that there. You will be able to find my Patreon where I do an electional report where you can get an idea for if you want to launch a product, or if you want to send that first text to somebody you think is cute or whatever it is, then there's an electional report for you there, as well as times to wait. So if there are difficult times out here, then sometimes your best move is to just let your opponents trip over shit and then maximize that opportunity later rather than tripping yourself. So that is all available. You'll be able to find all that at ZamboniFunk.com. I also do readings if you want to get an astrology reading. I do video readings. So there's a 10-minute joint where if you like my weeklies, which are available on Instagram and YouTube, if you like what I do there and you don't have over $100 to do a full hour dialogue reading, then I'll do a 10-minute video for you. Et cetera, et cetera. There's probably a bunch of shit that I didn't even mention because there's so much to it, but you'll be able to find all of it at ZamboniFunk.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you for your work. I definitely have benefited greatly from all of the things you do.
So glad to hear that. So glad.
Yeah. All right.
Thank y'all for having me.
Yeah. Happy 2023.
Happy 2023.